All right, ladies, thanks for coming back at the end of the day after like a long day of testing kids you literally haven't seen all day long. Hannah, I'm not sure if that was your situation or not, but if you're like anybody else in this group, it's been a day. So
Oh my word. We do not test until a week after next, but it has been a whole day anyway. And yeah, I'm flying by the skin of my teeth. It's all good. So, but we're here. That's all that matters.
well, we'll try to be good stewards at this time. We've got, I don't want to say a lot planned, but we tried to be really mindful of time and how long it would take so that we could like actually give you guys a little bit of time to work and think through and kind of process this. So we'll go ahead and get cracking on this. So my goodness, I know you don't need to see this screen in your life right now, but just for the sake that I said it, we'll rename ourselves here in just a little bit. Hannah, even though I'm gonna make you do it twice in this session. We can use chat a little bit, but we're such a small group, we can probably just use mic if that makes it easier. So you guys know it's going to be Sarah and myself guiding you guys through this little mini road trip through here. So if you will, go ahead and take a look at chat one more time or the participants list, and you want to rename yourself according to your grade or grades taught, and just leave your first name there. And we're thinking about, as we kind of continue this analogy of like a road trip, we're just asking ourselves what makes a road trip successful? Because I'm really trying hard to do that teacher thing that you do where you like try to like make an analogy work with what you got going on in the actual content of the lesson. So that's kind of why we're going to keep mentioning like a road trip. So what makes a road trip successful? Like, is it the stuff that you bring back? Is it the people that you get to spend it with? What is it that makes a road trip successful? Is it the planning? Is it the spontaneity? Some kind of combination of both. I'll give you guys a minute to take care of that in chat, and I'll just kind of go through this preliminary stuff just so we can kind of use our time wisely. So by this point, we know that we're familiar with this little graphic here of understanding how literacy and personalized learning work together. We're just trying to kind of filter that through the lens of what that looks like as far as like student engagement and student proficiency. So we'll spend a lot of time talking about proficiency today, of course. And so our purpose in this group is that we want to, of course, learn from each other. We want to look back on our work together and best practices. And we're going to be kind of revisiting those topics that your schools, maybe even you guys, had specifically denoted as areas of focus within your plans. So we're kind of burning through this semester. We're at the end here. We'll have some more important dates like teaser. Your May stipends are coming soon. So if nothing else like piques your interest, just know the information is on its way. In the meantime, though, we'll go ahead and begin this stretch of our road trip, and we'll just kind of review our goals for this year. So I'm going to read through these just because they're kind of bulky. So we're going to adapt the UBD process and evaluate its impact. So we've started that. We'll continue talking about ways to make this planning sustainable for you and your team, particularly if you're the lead in your school and what that actually looks like, kind of sharing that wealth. We're thinking about the relationship between what you're doing in the classroom, your new curriculum, and how that's going to manifest itself in student proficiency. And so, of course, we're connecting that standards work to student work and instructional practice. Like, what are the standards, the student work, and instructional practice? Like, how do they work together? So as we return to this idea of a road trip, and we're paralleling this idea of backward design, just planning with the end in mind, we're thinking about these 3, maybe 4 stages. So these 3 stages. So we're reviewing the UBD practice, completed that picture proficiency template, sharing out examples of student proficiency samples. And Sarah will get to that a little bit later. We have some samples for you just to kind of model that a little bit. And then hopefully we can identify a student exemplar, like just within your own classes, to be beneficial for this year, but really as you're thinking forward to next year. That's something that I keep hearing from teachers a lot, is like just kind of wanting to build that repertoire of like student samples so that we can use. All right, it's the end of the year, and I feel like Brittany, like 2007 over there. Like, I don't even need the context. If you're like, which one are you? Boom, that girl right there. But in any case, like, I hope that you guys have had the chance to kind of experience something more than Brittany 2017. But in any case, we've got 6 of these for you guys to think about. I've got like that you can do it in chat. You can unmic, you can put it in chat, whatever. But as you guys are thinking about what this teamwork is looking like in your building. I don't know, are you, Lucy and Ethel, like, have you partnered up with at least like one other team member, and maybe you're getting a little, maybe not well on your way, but you're getting a little bit of footing, a little bit of momentum? Is everybody still like, no, this is not what I'm going to do? Like, what place are you guys here? And I haven't even checked chat. Oh my goodness, you guys are like chatty in chat today. Snags. Who said that? Sarah? I knew that was going to be Sarah. Oh, yes. And Hannah is But okay, y'all are hungry this afternoon, I see.
There was a theme going on in this.
I know. I y'all brought snacks. 3, 4, 3, yeah. I feel like I want to say like I'm on 6, like we're well on our way. For me, I'm probably like 5. Like, let's review this one more time before we, dive head first into the deep end of the pool. But that's cool that you guys are being funny and optimistic. I vibe with that. That resonates with me. So whichever meme that we selected that best represents us in this process, we want to try to remember there is a destination. Like, make it to May, guys, right? We're almost there in this first stretch, and then it's kind of a weird time of year, right? Like, we're trying to wrap up things right now while we look down the road to what it could become. So we're reflecting while we're still kind of experiencing. But we want to try to remember what Stephen Covey is telling us about beginning with that end in mind. And it's really all about how we define that success is how we're measuring our progress along the way. Like, I don't know, maybe that's a way that, part of what makes a good road trip. Like, yes, I measure the success of a road trip in part like how like the rest stops. Like, that's an important feature to me. Like, ask my husband, if you've ever shared the car with me, that's going to be an important, that's how I define success part of it. So Sarah's going to tell us something like of actual content and merit here in just a little bit instead of like potty breaks. But she's going to tell us like what this like might actually look like in academia. You're welcome. I set you up like so perfectly for that, Sarah.
Listen, I love it. So I bet you would be a lot of fun on a road trip too, Candace.
I'm Brittany. Like, I will sleep until we get there and roll up. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say too, I love this quote from Michael Melcher, and we have to be careful here, especially in the year that we're in, that when we turn over the mental soil of our work, it helps us identify core values and prepares us to plant meaningful new goals. And we can't be too hard on ourselves about things that we may have done differently because of COVID or because of the ever-changing rolling hybrid. But there are things from this year that we may have learned or may have thought about differently that are worth getting familiar with and thinking about, honestly, as a way just to say, you know what, I'm probably going to bring some more of that into my practice this coming year, and I'm definitely not going to do that. It's just helpful to what we do in the classroom, in particular in relation to instructional practice. But before we get into all of this, I want to say this too, because I know both of you all are using, and Hannah, you're not using it now, but next year you're going to be using Amplify, correct? So, and Anna is using Amplify year 1, right? And so this is the caveat I have to say. So just like acronyms and snacks that teachers tend to like, right? We also tend to make things really hard. And here's what I'm going to say, that in year 1, I want you to know, and year 2, particularly in relation to Amplify or any high quality curriculum material, I could be talking about Pearson or expeditionary learning. If you don't in your teams engage in the planning protocols that we've been talking about and that we plan on talking about today, that's okay. Your students' outcome, assuming that like just teaching the curriculum in the order and in the structure that it is written, will improve student outcomes. Last year is a horrible year to start a new curriculum because you can't really weigh it in this like normal, like right school, what school's normal or what experience is ever normal. But last year was this past year, the year that we're in, is not normal in any way, shape or form as any other normal year. That's not normal. So I don't want you to feel like you have to kill yourself to learn your product and to teach well with it so that students will improve. Bottom line, if you engage in Amplify, teach it in order, dig into the cohesiveness, and get more efficient with your pacing, you are going to be well on your way to building proficiency year 1. That's it. That's all you got to do. Doesn't sound glamorous, doesn't sound glitzy. It's true though, based off of data that we're continuing to collect with schools across the United States. But we're teachers. We like acronyms, we like snacks, we like to complicate things, and we like things that help us as learners. And I think this is sort of where we're at with the work that we've been doing that Candace and I have been sharing with you. This is about how you support you and how we can be sustainable in building practices that are going to support what we want students to achieve without compromise. So in the chat, we're going to get deep. Like, guys, we were being silly. Now we're going to get like all serious. So in the chat, reflect on which processes, and I'm sorry, I need to put my thing up. Which planning processes, which part of your planning process is closely tied to student success? Like, what I mean by that is when you think about the parts of your planning that you feel like you can measure the success for students with, like, is there stuff that you spend time planning every single week or doing in that planning every single week that you can measure? And if so, what is it? Maybe it's when you're planning with students. Maybe it's when you're planning with your colleagues, or maybe it's just you by yourself. Like when you're professionally planning for the next week instruction, what is it that you spend the most time on that you feel like connects to direct student outcomes that you can see and measure? It's not a trick question. It's a hard question. It's not a trick question. And you
Is
can
it okay?
unmute. You don't
Is
have
that
to.
okay? Okay, I didn't want to interrupt. So again, this year has been a whole situation. We won't even know how hard it was until it's over. Like, psychology tells us we can't actually process things unless we reflect on them, and we're not even to that point yet. So we'll take care of that later. But thus far, I think, at least in my experience this year, and every team's set up differently. I do not have a team where I can plan cohesively. I have each of my, we have some major age gaps, major preference differences on our ELA team, and that's okay. So we never really plan cross curricularly in it within the English department. I'll actually talk more about reading intervention with my social studies teachers, my science teachers, which is fine. Like, that's okay too. So I would say probably the first one. So when I think of progress versus perfection, when I'm planning lessons, I try so hard to adapt the material to what my specific crew is struggling with in this year. And it's different every year. We just recently were gearing up for testing, and we examined our recent benchmarks, and year after year, we always struggle with informational texts. We can have the most cohesive year ever, and we will still struggle with that. So we are working on some question stems just to kind of build out our knowledge there and just review. Wednesdays is the day where my literacy coach comes by, so I get to hang out with Tracy Ballou on Wednesday, so that's always good. So I would say definitely I try to hone in on the students. I wish I had a team that was really like into like planning together and like reading novels together, but that hasn't been my experience, and that's okay. Every team is different. So I tend to focus on the kids, and it's interesting because I teach a couple sections. We don't really do honors at the middle school level, but we have an honors algebra class, and I teach those students as well. And then I have one intervention class. So I definitely have to vary my assignments, my verbiage. I think about Bloom's taxonomy a lot, and we think about that highest tier is create. So with my inclusion group, I always have to sort of tier up slowly, and that's okay. Whereas my honors crew always wants to jump right to create, and that's exciting too. So that was a whole lot of rambling, but I hope it was, hopefully something stuck.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. I love your attitude about it too. It's like you're like really okay with that. Although you also know what you want. And so
I so wish, like, don't get me wrong. Like, if I realize I'm like a super nerd. Like, I just finished my dissertation on literacy. I'm like if some stranger on the subway was like, hey, do you like literacy? I would probably talk to them for 3 hours and be like, yes, I really love this. So it's a whole thing, but I don't expect that. But I think, and that's another thing, like when we're talking about building professionally, that's something I struggle. And I don't want to just reduce it to attitude, because this year teachers have been through it. So if they're not into having another PLC, and that this year, I am not pushing that, because everyone's had it up to here. So, but I do wish I had that, which is why it's great that I get to hang out with you guys every once in a while. So
Thank you. That's awesome. Anna, did you want to add to that?
I mean, I can. I'm in a similar situation in that in my building, there is another teacher that usually I collaborate with, but they weren't fully on board of jumping into Amplify like I was. So we just kind of went our separate ways this year. But I do feel like across the county in the 7th grade team, I fit in more. I can go to them if we want to talk. I'm really excited. We're going to have a PLC the last Friday before break, and I'm just really excited to hang out with them and talk about Amplify, which is like me nerding out right now. I'm like, oh yeah, let's talk about that. But so for the most part this year, I feel like I have thought about my students, but I've more thought about myself professionally and how I'm putting this curriculum out there. From the beginning of when I first taught my first lesson to now, I really understand the curriculum and I'm able to like see where it's going and what I need to do to be able to focus on my students next. So I guess I'm a mixture of all. I don't really.
Yeah, well, I just was curious about that because I feel like there's things that when we think about the time that we spend either by ourselves or with colleagues or with students, sometimes there's certain components of that have a lot of value that we absolutely need to keep doing and continue to explore. And so there's no right or wrong answer here. I just was curious to see what you all, how you all, your all's patterns and connection to that, because again, and Candace, if you'll bump us up one. One of the things that we started with in our last session was backwards design. It's not new. And, if I was to talk about another kind of overlaying structure here that we'd be thinking about to some degree, and also maybe connecting to the planning components that you all found to be helpful, thinking about your students or thinking about all of it, is UDL as well as UBD, because we're using backwards design to think about students, to prioritize students' knowledge in how they're going to cultivate understanding of reading. I mean, and I'm saying reading, and we could geek out over this, probably Hannah and Anna, about like reading is not just reading. There's like ways that we have to think about reading, like math. And I know people are like, no, you can't talk about math and reading at the same time. But there are many processes that when we think about the standards work that we dug into in our last session that are the behavioral components to reading. The Common Core does a good job. The 10 Ready standards do a good job of giving us really deep ways to read, but allowing us a lot of freedom to develop the pathway, the process that we use for kids to make sense of difficult text, which can be both a gift and feel like a trick to some degree. So the process that we were just like we did last time allowed us to unpack the prompt and kind of get at the heart of the knowledge that kids were building to be masterful in that end of the unit, by the end of the unit, over the texts, but also like the standards work around what kind of reader do they have to be? Are they going to be analytical? Are they going to be writing to an argumentative prompt? Are they going to be writing an informational prompt? It also allowed us to think about what kids need to know as speakers, as listeners. How do they need to improve what it is they're thinking? And all of these things connect to this sort of unspoken mastery that we sort of dug into a little bit and took some time defining. But all of it kind of aligns to this backwards design process. And it starts with where are we going? Where are we going instructionally? And what do kids need to know by the end? And then from that point, we can dig into the work. And that filters our decision-making. Kind of, Anna, you talked a little bit about this in kind of knowing where you need to go in Amplify now and knowing how to make sense of what it is you're going to teach. That core instruction, and I'm going to call all of that what we just talked about is core instruction, teaching with standard mastery in mind to get at the deep thinking, the rich text, and being able to make sense of it. Now we're going to transition into the afterwards. So now that our instruction is done, what does proficiency look like? Like, what does it physically look like in student work? How do we know kids are getting there? How do we know we're seeing growth over time? So, and I keep looking to, to tap ahead. We're giving you these materials organized based off of these two processes. Backwards design planning, UBD planning support materials. It's the research, the slide deck, the blank template, and then on the right, we are going to do today the student work analysis training materials, and we're really providing this to you as a redeliverable. So Hannah, I realized after you shared that this could be somewhat of a challenge for you, but it could maybe be a structure that you float for next year as a way for your team to build some knowledge together. And the frequency of this is kind of nice maybe on your situation too. Okay, so it's not like, hey, every Thursday we're going to get together. It's more like before we teach the unit and after the unit is over. So again, if there was some, just differences of things that make it better for us to be together less in that kind of setting, this is a perfect situation because it's only twice. And it's once before you teach the unit, once after the unit. I will also say that we're going to dig back into some of the Hattie research, but this is what connected to some of the greatest gap closure type planning you can do with a team ever. So these two processes together achieve 7 years, if done consistently, achieve 7 years of gap closure. 0.5 is considered a year's growth. And so this comes out to like, I mean, it's ridiculous when you add the two Hattie gap, the effect sizes together. So we have a document that we realized. What? I'm sorry,
I think I'm on a
say?
delay. I think I'm on a delay. I'm going to mute myself again. I was just pulling up this Hattie research for you, but I'm going to back up to stage 2.
Oh, okay. Awesome. So essentially what we're going to do is we're going to look at this student work template. And I realize that we may not have time to insert student work. And ideally, I would love to sit down with you to look at student work and go across this. But we're going to share this with you as thinking about you as teacher leaders in redelivering this to your team.
Hey, when I clicked the first link that Candace put, it didn't have the second column.
Huh.
Like it just has the UBD planning, training, support materials.
We will fix that here in just a second. I can pull that up for you here in just a moment.
Because like I can't click the student analysis because.
Well, that's a bummer. Well, here's the document that when you click on it, this is what it will show. And essentially what you're going to do is bring 3 samples of what you as a teacher and your team each identifies out of their class as what they would assume is proficient, not advanced, not like the best, but like 3 average pieces of work that you feel like capture proficiency. And then what you're going to do is give the student work just numbers and work through these questions. What does the student work demonstrate about what they know about the task? So what is here? What part of the task did they answer? Evidence of knowledge they're building. What does the student work demonstrate about proficiency with requirements of the 10 Ready standards? And remember, if you did the backwards design first before you started to teach the unit, you connected to those 10 Ready standards. So these are features that align to 10 Ready standards. And again, we're going to kind of look through that lens here in a few minutes. But when we think about focus and organization, development, language, conventions, what are some pieces of evidence like that we're finding? If it's a narrative piece, did they include some of those skills in their writing that you all discussed? What does the student's work demonstrate about the depth of understanding and reasoning ability? So like when you think about that vocabulary and phrasing related to the knowledge they have built over the week, are you seeing usage of that? And, what is it? And then as you look at the student work individually, what is the evidence in their work that aligns to your instructional work? Now, here's what I'm going to say. As a coach, I've done this both, where every teacher has a copy of this in a team and we fill it out. But I have found this to be best done if I, the coach or the lead teacher, direct kind of the meeting, or ask the assistant principal, or if you have a district coach like Tracy, she's going to kill me, but yeah, call Tracy and be like, hey, Tracy, could you facilitate this session for us? I love, as a teacher, when I'm doing this from a teacher perspective, I love being able to see this on a smart board, and us across, like as we share out, the coach types in the evidence as it's being shared. That way you can see across the page connection already. Even though you're not there yet, you're just collecting this evidence. I like it posted on the smart board so I can see it. It just is a nice step. Please don't, well, Tracy will probably kill me, but that's okay. Candace, do you care to scroll down? Does that make sense? Are there any questions about that part? Okay. I like this projected too, but maybe not at first. Like I always say, and again, this is my phrase, I'd like to give you, and Candace, I've heard Candace say this too, I'd like to give you 2 minutes of private think time. So if the teachers have this individually, then they just write it down on their sheet, and then the coach, if they're running the smart board or the Promethean board, they can collect this on a single document for the team. So notes and observations regarding the patterns across student work samples. So now that you've looked at all three, what patterns are you noticing? And here, if you did it all together, you could do what patterns are you noticing in yours, and what patterns are you noticing in the grade level? And you know, when you were talking about RTI, Hannah, I think I remember it was Anna. You know, when you're doing RTI too, sometimes knowing the grade levels areas as well can be helpful, because then you can transfer, you know, the support can cover across. Suggestions and ideas related to your teaching and instruction. So, I mean, it's not like I'm trying to have a party all the time, guys, but I'll be honest. If I'm going to teach, I want to know what's working. It helps me know what I need to do more of. So when I think about this, yeah, this is maybe kind of like, you know, what did I teach well in my mind that showed up in their work? So this is kind of where I'm like tooting my own horn, if you will. And then I'm also looking for evidence of that work and highlighting it, because that might be where I even have a little party with them to recognize in terms of some positive feedback to give them back as in terms of what they did. And then this last one I feel like is kind of key to the work as well. What student work features identify proficiency? So we didn't get to it, but at the end of the session for UBD, there's kind of a place to have a reflection conversation about what needs to be here for proficiency to happen. If you happen to still have that chart, you can always post it on the wall, or you could pull it up digitally. This is great to like recalibrate. So now that we thought this is what proficiency was going to be when we started this unit. And as we progress through, like Anna was talking about, once I taught subunit 3, now I know what it really means now that I've taught the text. Because sometimes as you get into the text with the kids, and Anna, you might be able to talk a little bit about this, you can read it. I had this experience, and I consider myself I'm a book nerd, kind of. I read it at home, I highlighted it, I flagged it, and then I taught it, and I was like, oh. And then I was like, okay, this is what it means. So there was several steps in this process, but I felt like by the third kind of experience that I had where I was reflecting on what I did and what the purpose was, I started to get it. Have you had that experience, Anna?
Yeah, and actually, like I've been videoing my lessons almost like practice before I do in front of the kids, but it's actually for my virtual kids. And so even like after that second time of actually teaching with students, I'm like, oh, holy cow, I missed that whole purpose, just because the kids help you realize what you're supposed to be doing. And so not teaching to the computer did not give that feedback for me. So yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of exciting. It's also kind of frustrating, because you're like, man, sometimes it made me feel like, man, that first class that I had, whoo, by the second and the third class, don't feel guilty. That's just part of it. But that's sort of how it works. And this first year, it definitely is going to work that way. But what this does too, and I mean, I think about bringing people along and really inclusive. I mean, we use inclusion and those words so much with our students. I really feel like professionally, it's something we need to start really expecting that we do with our peers as well too. It's like this idea of like, how can we support each other in clarifying what proficiency means to build in that equity and inclusion together, because there's always, I mean, like Candace and I feel like there's a lot that's similar about Candace and I, and there's a lot that's different. And I can think about something and I feel like Candace is going to give me a different perspective on it, even though we have similar thinking sometimes, and sometimes very different thinking. It's that perspective and it's that processing through someone else that makes my understanding so much better. So I feel like that's what this section really is. It's really kind of the money spot, if you will, in terms of your teammates' work towards what the picture of proficiency is for this unit. And yeah, you might have an exemplar, but if you take the exemplar and you don't have this conversation, you're not going to have deep standard knowledge and make those deep connections. I don't necessarily know I would go Anna's route where you teach it 3 times to a computer. No, I'm just kidding. I know, but that's a lot of work, girl. That's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. Are there any questions about this part of the process?
Were y'all able to access this document like the forced copy?
The second link says I need access to
Okay.
request access.
Is it the one that I'm sharing on screen right now?
I guess so.
I think so, yeah.
It does, I
No,
mean,
it's
it doesn't really give a title when I click it, so I don't really know how to tell you if that is the.
Okay.
I was going to ask a question just briefly.
Yeah.
So in stage 3, when you say notes and observations regarding the patterns across student work samples, are we including all subjects here? Like, can I have their social studies teacher look at one of their passages? Because then that becomes something that you could do great on a grade level basis.
absolutely. I mean, this process in terms of like unit work could absolutely be integrated. If that's the way that you all are setting up, like the way you plan and that kind of thing, and build proficiency, like not just across your unit lesson in ELA, but also across your social studies unit. So that's absolutely something you could totally do to provide the social studies teacher with some insight as to what's sticking and transferring.
Right. We currently do not teach that way at all, but I feel like that's something that could lead to so many benefits. And when I think about some of the tenets of rural life, and when we talk about creating personalized learning plans, and that's something that has to go across the curriculum. And I feel like, I don't know, so I think so often kids struggle. If they struggle with reading and writing, that's a struggle in each class. Perhaps not math so much, but in every other main discipline, they struggle with that. So if teachers would start pushing some of these ideas in every subject, it would not only lessen the load for English teachers, but it would give them shared accountability and say, hey, like this isn't just the English teacher's problem. This is all of us need to engage this at some level, because reading and writing is going to be a part of their existence. I mean, through college, if they opt for that route, you know?
Yeah, I love that connection, Hannah, because I really, and Candace and I were actually talking about this, I believe. I've had a lot of conversations the last few days, so I feel like I'm having meeting salad in my head. But the concept of like proficiency, and I'm going to clarify this just because I feel like it deserves clarification. And I'm going to go back to my original concept here. I feel like it would be tremendously powerful, even if it's not a first year curriculum purchase on the social studies teacher's part. But just selfishly speaking, it's that concept of like, what is proficiency that I feel like would have an awakening if we use this in social studies, for them to dig into their standards to recognize the reading and the writing that is absolutely integrated into the work that they're doing that overlaps. And I think part of the problem is we haven't given teachers enough time to develop what proficiency means in student work, and then using that student work to go back to the standards to see the evidence of that we've made them feel like they're doing something that is more related to English than it is to social studies, when we all know that it's right there. So like, I think that this is a great, that's a great idea to take it across content.
Well, and because it makes me think, when we think about building literacy beyond the classroom, like if they want to become a mathematician, even, take the field that is most obviously the antithesis of English, even so, they will write theories and they will have to publish articles, and all of this relates to literacy. Or we need to be teaching kids how to read. If they want to be a scientist, they always think like awesome lab coat and cool liquids, but then they have to do a lab write-up. Like all of that is integral to that profession. And I think we forget that. We just say, oh, go to English, go read a novel, it'll be fine. When it's not fine, it's not fine at all. So
and I was so inspired. In Kingsport, we have this teacher that's in 8th grade, and I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to ensure my child gets this teacher, because I feel like, oh my gosh, I want to go to 8th grade social science class, because she anchors all of her units in this phenomenon. And so what I love about it is that essentially she has a draft book, and once they watch this phenomenon, she asks this question that they have to use science language to explain. And they do that at the very beginning. And literally the rest of the unit work, like they go back and add diagrams and pictures and get more specific and more focused with their language. So at the end, they're still going back to their original draft from the beginning. But I love it because it's like this map to like exactness. This is the kind of work though that will help. I mean, you all could be heroes in your building. I'm just saying, if you were to deliver these to, like, say, your teacher leaders or your department chairs that are supporting their subject areas in thinking just using student work that they need to dig into to connect to standards. I'm going to say this is part of that process, that when we used it in math and literacy in kindergarten through 6th grade, we closed all of our gaps for 2 years in a row. And then they not only closed the state gap requirement, they closed the federal gap requirement as well and won a federal award for 2 years in a row. It was a lot of work for 2 subject areas, but the principal attended every single one of them, which made a difference.
That's amazing. Well, and I think there's that inverse relationship too. Yes, you as all subject teachers, we should share the burden of literacy. Yes, we should all shoulder it. But also, I wonder all the time how many of my kids hate social studies when in fact they do not read well. And that is the chief component of that class. So half of them, because it's natural to be obstinate against the thing that you are not confident about. Like you develop a deep hatred quickly if it makes you feel inferior, if you don't understand. So how many of our kids could become more successful in each of those? They could actually find their calling, their vocation. But if they don't have the basic tool of literacy, they will never know. They will never know. And that's why this is so serious. It matters so much.
It does. And it also matters for like your brand new teachers coming into your buildings, or new folks. It matters for the teachers that have been there forever, that know all the standards in their mind, or have been, because I feel like I'm a standard nerd. It's a problem. Because I work for Ed Reports, I'm constantly having to justify and find evidence of every single Common Core standard, like 150, it's like every single time I do that. And it almost made me crazy. I learned something going through the context of the unit for sure, but anchoring all of this in standard understanding and standard language helps constantly reshape my lens to how to use that language in the classroom. So there's a lot to that, like helping teachers figure out what is in their lane and recognizing, I mean, honestly, you do, like you were saying, there's so much overlap in content areas, even in math, for example.
Matt, when you are a guru on standards, I often wonder why there aren't standards that are cross-curricular. Like you say, regardless of what you teach, you address this, and this. Are there? Did I just miss that?
There are, and again, they're called different things. And Tennessee, part of what makes this complicated is if I was to speak in just the terms of like Tennessee or national standards, the national standards have like core competencies and math practices that absolutely relate to language arts standards. they're not written as standards, they're written as practices. So part of what makes, and again, I say this because ELA, part of those unspoken standards that lead to proficiency are what we would call core practices as a reader, like what reading behavior is core. We just haven't defined those in ELA, but it's because our standards are not isolated. And we're going to dig into that here in just a few minutes. But when I say those standards are not isolated, and Candace is going to roll her eyes when I start talking about this, but like when we think about language strategies and there that are questions that are assigned to language strategies, I don't necessarily know how many of us, when we think about the best evidence questions, associate that with a language standard. But it's also associated with with several comprehension standards around author's purpose and contrast, which is huge in middle school. Like the 10 Ready Practice Assessment has like 5 contrast questions because it helps kids determine the best evidence in a narrator's tone or mood. And those are strategies that require language skills. So I think that it even helps language teachers make some deeper connections across standards, because we've said for years, well, since we've adopted Common Core and turned them to 10 Ready, which is essentially Common Core, is that there's no standard isolation. And that's what's hard to describe until you can make those actual deep connections across how a kid determines the best. Does that make sense? Because there's several pathways to that. And it's embedded in that connectivity between the standards. But it's a process. It's part of the behavior of going back to the text and keeping track of what you're reading and identifying for kids. How do you know what the author's purpose is? Can they identify the contrast? Can they identify how the character, or when and where the character makes change? That's where they make that change over time. That's important to the author's purpose. Those are all like assessed together. So I'm glad we're having this conversation too, Candace, because the samples that we've provided in the next session that I kind of want us to walk through, since we wanted to be able to all look at the same work, and we felt like we didn't want to put anybody on the spot like, hey, Anna, share all your student work. It's on you. So we just pulled some samples from, I was talking to you about a school that I worked with. And so they were kind enough to let me collect samples from them from this work. And so what I want us to talk about real quick is just to have an opportunity to see some of the power that's behind this. When you're with your colleagues and you're looking at student work, I've got 2 student work samples here. And I want us to walk through this sample. We're going to give you about a minute on this page to think about as you read the student's work. What are you noticing about focus and organization, development, language, and conventions? Essentially the big 4 categories on a writing rubric. And then what instructional practices are you picking up on that the teacher used heavily to support this work? Keep in mind, so don't be too hard. This is 4th grade, okay? So this is a 4th grader's work, and this work is 3 pages long. The next 2 pages are the next slide. That's why we're giving you a minute to read this. So just kind of filter this through Tennessee Writing Rubric general categories. What are you noticing about focus and organization, development, language, and conventions? And then, are you seeing any nods to what the teacher probably supported? So if you will, take about a minute to read through that. In conclusion, this was an opinion piece, by the way. I love the question on the second page of the second paragraph.
I just have a question.
Yeah.
Like she did it on the front page too. Like she added the words I think in two separate places. And I get that that is an opinion, but by middle school, we're trying to get them to quit. And so the fact that this student already knows I don't need to put I think, this is already my opinion. To me as a middle school, I know it's fourth grade, but me as a middle school teacher would just kind of wish she wouldn't do that. So is there a reason behind the fact that she did that? Do you know, or?
This is the second year that they're using opinion pieces. So there's certain components of an opinion that's transition. This was done in October. I probably should have said that too. So this is October of their fourth grade year. Okay. So by the time they move into the fall of their fifth grade year, they don't get taught argumentative until sixth grade. So argumentative standards don't pop up until sixth grade and usually second semester, which is why, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, you know, I feel like anyway, that is why it's not tested a lot in middle school, because they've not had enough time to practice argumentative techniques, which is a lot of reasons why you're not seeing a lot of argumentative techniques. That's not to say there's not fourth and fifth graders that are writing paragraphs that are there's obviously people that are more advanced. This was proficient. And so proficient in fourth grade means that you're using, I think.
Oh.
And I think what is what they're trying to do and what they struggle with, honestly, is if the wording in the prompt is not an obvious opinion, they struggle with the difference between an explanatory essay and an opinion essay at this age level. So I think what she's trying to do, and I think I could be wrong. I know it's the student, but I feel like somebody's helped that child edit that. And I'm wondering if it's another child. I'm also wondering if it's the teacher, to just make sure that the kid knows that they're answering an opinion piece.
Okay, because I mean,
I understand what you're saying, because it's not necessarily advancing the sentence syntax.
right, exactly. And so, and in a middle school, they do the same exact thing where they'll put I think, and we're trying, and especially in seventh grade, I try to, especially the more advanced students and proficient students, I try to get them to lean away from using I, know that, and be confident that they're the ones. So I was just curious, because I mean,
it's second semester in sixth grade. Keep that in mind too.
Yeah. So I was just curious.
Yeah, argumentative is used, like usually in fifth grade, the writing prompt is an opinion. So if you don't have I think or I believe, they sometimes can get marked down.
Oh, okay.
But they keep in mind too, Anna, I love that you're like, you have to have these, because you know they've only had it literally that year, and it's usually around right after Christmas that standard gets introduced. But it is introduced in sixth grade, argumentative.
Yeah. I just didn't know about the I think part, but that makes sense now that you.
Which is also goes to, I mean, honestly, it also goes to the point that Hannah was making earlier about the informational text. What I find to be tricky is when we read a text that's informational, but it feels like it's an opinion, but it's not, because there's evidence for both sides. And they struggle with that significantly because they've just learned that construct in writing in sixth grade.
And I think we sort of saw some of that verbiage when they say, where was it? They'd said things like, I believe, or first paragraph, this may be the only real physical clue. So they're still kind of hesitant and tender. So, and they're trying to get to that level, but that makes perfect sense if it's not introduced at that point. But I think something they did really well was encouraging them to provide evidence. They cited multiple examples. They talked about physical clues. They talked about different characters in the history narrative. And I was impressed by that, like, especially for a fourth grader. And then this is just because I've been doing GIM kits daily to get my kids hyped up for testing. And we just completed one on text structures where we talk about the different keywords if we're doing a comparative or sequential or chronological. And I see a lot of sequential words, first, second, last, and that's impressive.
Yeah, I thought so too. I feel like this teacher has intentionally, because of the development of the body, the 2 body paragraphs that we've got here, and the contrast in the conclusion, I feel like the focus in this case may have been in her modeling using those transition words. I don't know, but I wonder that from this. And we have one more piece, same prompt, same opinion prompt about the lost colony. This is just 2 pages. Same questions. So thinking about those same questions, I'm curious, what did you all pick up on?
Sarah, just to clarify, both of these were identified in the same grade, same prompt as being proficient.
Different teachers.
Different teachers, but both were identified as being proficient. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Can I tell a funny real quick? I
Yes.
promise you will laugh. Okay, so we've been doing IXL passages. I don't even remember what we were studying, but we were reading them aloud to do a few examples together before we started. And my kids were reading a passage about this. And when they came to the name of the island, my kid, Jackson, read it as crouton. And suddenly we were all at Olive Garden and it was great. So I have not laughed so hard. So he was like, there's an island called Crouton. I was like, yeah, you've never been to Olive Garden? So it's just middle school humor. Sorry, carry on.
No, I love it.
You guys.
I love that. So
I'll write books on middle school humor.
Yes, it's the best. Like they make me laugh every day. But I was looking specifically just now at their first sentence and their last sentence. So I'm fascinated by how they're framing it in terms of centuries. So many years ago, there was a mystery, blah, blah, blah. And then they even talk about in the middle of that second page, I think that the Europeans wanted to settle in the New World. Like that's big picture stuff like that. There's so much that encompasses that statement. And then they revisit there at the end, they say, but this mystery has never been solved. So that even they're setting it in a specific time frame, but there's less like confident this is what it is. So I see less of a opinion piece here and more, this is more informative, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, and this is kind of, I think that's, to me, that's part of the contrast too in some of this is that in October, just having really learned extended writing in 3rd grade, the complexity of comparing 2 texts that are, and it's from Cobblestone. I didn't provide the text. I probably should. They were like 4-page text each. So this was a lot of information to process. It took them 6 weeks to do kind of the in-depth reading of this text. And they read the text over the course of the first part of the weeks, and then they start to write about the text using the text as a reference in small groups. So a lot of this work was done by themselves, but a lot of it was done also at a reading table with the teacher. So I feel like this teacher, I don't know what I'm curious to know what you all think.
I kind of feel like the first teacher was more focused on the structure, if that makes sense. Like, let's make sure you know how to write a long essay, versus the second one was more focused on their focus and like how they develop their ideas, and like evidence too. Cause I felt like the other one was very just lackadaisical with his evidence. And this one at least even says, you know, in this specific place it said. So
It makes me wonder if that's what this teacher had been focusing on, that when you claim or you reference that you have to pull information from both articles. And just to be completely clear here, when we did the list of what features needed to be present, neither of these essays were picked as exemplar. The first one, the teacher admitted clearly, and it was very helpful to the team, that she had over supported. She had over scaffolded, to the point where some of the language was not their own. And in the second one, there was more freedom to write incorrectly without support at all. So they were going back to what they knew, which was informational explanatory. So you can see that, I feel like, in these two pieces. But everybody admitted that it was helpful to see this, because they felt like that the piece that was accepted, which I don't have because we turned it in and it's in their notebooks. The piece that was accepted as the exemplar for this grade level was a good mix of strong introduction, strong first body paragraph, and then was some more free writing towards the end, with in conclusion being there and maybe a simple sentence about their opinion. Because in all honesty, in October, the teacher had not modeled those concluding paragraphs anyway, enough to where that they could have, you know, that they were going to be structured. So the third body paragraphs being kind of wonky are pretty normal for this time of year. This one is just underdeveloped as an opinion. But like you said, it seems like you can tell what the teacher focused on, because there's clearly some direct connection to the two articles that they read. And that there's an importance, like you were talking about, Hannah, the evidence. Like there was some really interesting, I think there's some good voice here as a writer too. Like I can kind of get the voice of this writer too, and the voice in the other one as well. But I think some of that's the voice of the teacher a little bit. But so I wanted you to have that experience. Do you hear to click forward, Candace?
Sure. If
you don't care, either unmute and maybe you're already on mute. Like, just how did today's learning in your mind, if you could reflect on how you think it could potentially impact your practice and support, how do you think this kind of work could support proficiency?
I think that sitting down and comparing across the board how we see proficiency could help, because like what I see as proficient might not actually be proficient. And so sharing that with someone else so that they can tell me what they see, and then finding that common ground would help us develop professionally into what we really need to be focusing on and teaching. And I'll be honest, nobody's ever helped me. Nobody's ever read my student work. Like, I don't know if I'm grading it right or not. So
you are, girl, you are. That's not what this, listen, you're grading it right.
But I mean, but really though, what?
I think you phrased that really well. I wondered that about those examples that we had looked at. I thought, you know, if those teachers had had the opportunity to plan together, to not even daily, but just like periodically have that collaboration, I think that would have been really cool to see what this teacher thought was proficient with this one, because I wanted to see those two student samples further developed. And I think that would have been cool if those two teachers could have gotten together to decide, like, this is what I'm teaching is important. This is what you're teaching. What do
I
we
kicked myself that I'd not copied this grade level's last task, because what I could show you from kindergarten across 5th grade, even though we weren't like comparing in any way, at the end of the year, because the district now has the notebook, thanks district. But like what you see clearly is growth over time in teachers' understanding of what proficiency is. And it's not that it becomes the same. So don't get me wrong, like there's never where all the samples are the same, but there are features in the samples that you start to see move in a direction that's more aligned to what kids need to know and be able to do. Not so much how I interpret it like by myself. I think it's like, you know how like when you look at a picture and there's something that catches your eye? I think it's the same way kind of with standards work. There's certain things about standards and the language that we feel about ourselves or that we believe about ourselves as professionals that we hone in on because somebody somewhere has given us that feedback, either in our experience as a student or in the classroom or as an experience in the student as a, you know, upperclassman in college or as a student teacher. And so I think sometimes we pick up on that language. And I feel like there's that in a team, especially with 2+ teachers, we all have enough difference that we start to focus in on different parts of that standard. And we really need each other to help develop that picture of what true proficiency means through multiple perspectives. So again, this process is part of like what we talked about earlier, the pre-unit work and the post-unit work. And I call this building a picture of proficiency because I feel like the pre-unit work in some cases is just as important as the post-unit work. And it's really bookends to unit instruction, designed to build a picture of proficiency. So I'm curious, when you reflect on this process, do you see how the connection, do you all feel like how do you feel like this connects to standards work and to student proficiency?
I think just the aspect of reflection is key to me. I think so often, even when teachers plan in departmentally or cross-curricularly, I think so much of the emphasis is on the instruction. So we talk about how we're going to teach it, but then we rarely reflect on the outcomes in a way that benefits us and our students. So by the time they turn in that paper, you're just glad that it's done. You don't go back and compare, oh, this student took it this way. Maybe I focused more on themes and explanations of important conflicts, whereas my coworker, he adores grammar and he may have picked out some more grammatical things. So I think, yeah, just that component of reflection is something that idea in and of itself is tremendous and I think worth examining as a team.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah. And so, I mean, again, and this is where I'm asking for your honest opinion. I mean, do you feel like having I know the first process we walked through very quickly, and planning can sometimes be anywhere from 50 minutes to an hour and a half to 20 minutes, depending on meetings. Do you feel like that this bookend process is sustainable, something that you could do throughout the year or maybe a couple of times a year? Do you think this is something that could be sustainable and beneficial?
I think so. I think it would have been hard to do in the first year only because you're just trying to figure out your movement. But now that I know like what each lesson is kind of about, now I could go back and really unpack what it's about. So yes, I think it'd be really hard in the first year to really, yes, you need to do some of that backward design and look at the end. Like I've made sure I've read the test and the essay prompt before I've ever gone and looked at each lesson, but really, really unpacking each lesson and diving in to what exactly it is getting at, I think would be really hard to do just as you're trying to learn the curriculum.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So I'm even
Enough.
No. Yeah. And so I'm hearing what you're saying too. Like I wondered this just because like we had kind of positioned this to like transition to lead teachers, like to just kind of say, hey, this is a process if you wanted to try it with your teams. But kind of even in reflection for me as we go through this, I feel like just as a point of giving you all the freedom to not worry about collecting the evidence of the group, it would be something that a coach or an assistant principal or somebody could come in and just take notes for the group as they go, so they don't get, so the people that are in the team don't get bogged down with the note-taking portion of what would be involved here. Would you all kind of agree with that?
Yeah. And I'll say this too. Our district has voted not to do Raisin in the Sun, which is the second.
Yeah.
And so we're going to have to like come up with a new unit basically. So I think it would be cool to use this when we all meet here in May and like say, okay, in Amplify, this is what they had to do at the end of that essay, like at the end of that unit. We need to keep that idea in mind and work backwards to figure out what novel, what text are we going to use to still get to that same goal, because that's still super important. So I'm anxious to throw that out there to my 7th grade group here. And as we try to decide what in the world we're going to do instead of Raising the Sun.
Well, and Candace, you here to click forward. Sorry. So again, I'm just sharing this. This is from Teaching with Fire. If I read the whole poem, I cry. So I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to read this to you now because I probably would cry because I'm emotional. It's that time of day. I'm hungry. But again, this is, I will read it. I will suck it up and read it. You know, I love this quote. I love people who harness themselves an ox to a heavy cart, who pull like water buffalo with massive patience, who strain in the mud and the muck to move things forward, who do what has to be done again and again. And I know that, you know, there's a lot of information about high quality curriculum materials that has not been delivered to teachers in the way that we would say is thoughtful or respectful necessarily. But I love that there are people that just dig into the work because they know it's the right thing to do for kids, even if it doesn't make sense to them. And so leave it to teachers to be those people. And it's inspiring. So I really want to say thank you for being here on round 2. Candace, right? Woo woo. I wish that we could spend more time together. I wanted to add more examples of like the work because it's so cool. I feel like that's really helpful to see the student work samples and be able to kind of walk through some of that process and experience it. You all were troopers. Thank you for hanging in there with us. And so what's next? So we have, you know, sharing your learning with others. As lead teachers and lead learners for your school, please pass along your learning with other colleagues. And we do have a session April, let's see, that was today, April 21st, and then May stipends to be mailed, woo woo. So in May, you'll get your money. And if you don't care to take a minute to fill out the feedback form, we would really appreciate that. And thank you again for your time. And, you know, again, hit up Tracy, Hannah, and don't tell her I said that, just kidding, you can tell her. But she would be more than happy to help, I'm sure, you know, to dig into that process and even think about it. I mean, I even think sometimes pre-service work, it's kind of nice to do that kind of thinking pre-service, because then particularly the pre-unit work, because it's pre-unit time anyway.
Oh, for sure. No, she's awesome. She actually today did a little mini PLC, which is great because it kind of takes some pressure off of me in that hard in between. So that was great. So I was super thankful.